new board member, and I'm here with our treasurer, Jen Wagner. But before we get into the introductions and all the other good stuff, I want to tell you how to participate and engage with us. Go to Blue Jeans, click on the hand icon if you want to ask your question. You can send the chat to the moderator. And if you're in person, we got a lot of people in here. You just don't see them. But join us at the podium. And if you're on Facebook, type your question in the comment section of the live stream, and we will get we've got a team here that will get your question and then get it up to us. So that's how you can participate. Tell a friend, and we want to try to get a lot of people on here. But before we do get into the good stuff, let's look at who we're talking to today. We've got our treasurer and her team. So, Mrs. Wagner, tell us, who are you?
Good evening, everyone. I am Jennifer Wagner. I am the Treasurer and Chief Financial Officer for Sept Public Schools. I've been in this role for 7.5 years, although I've been with the district for 29 in October 3rd. And so I'm just really thrilled that I've been able to combine my professional careers into this role and being a good financial steward for our taxpayer dollars.
So you must have started when you were like 10.
Yeah. Personally, I'm married, going on 37 years next week, and 3 daughters, grown, they're all adults, grandmother of 2, and I don't know what else to say about me. But let me introduce you to our Assistant Treasurer, Ms. Kimberly Hughes.
Come on, Kimberly Hughes. Thank you so much. Tell us about you.
Hello, my name is Kimberly Hughes. I have served in the capacity of the Assistant Treasurer. This is year number 2 now, but I've been with the district for 22 years. It will be in November, and I get the privilege of working with Ms. Jennifer Wagner and serving our students in the district in the capacity of being a financial steward. So I do enjoy the work that I do. I have 2 adult children, grown-ish children, and that's just one of the best decisions I've made in my life. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for all the. I just want to also give a small amount of time for a shout out. You and your team do a lot, and just so that people know and are aware, one little known fact I think is that the superintendent and the treasurer report directly to the board. So that's kind of an unknown fact in the state of Ohio. That's how this is, and that's how it works. So Ms. Wagner is such an important part of our team. Not only does she keep us honest with the money, she's super, super knowledgeable. You're going to hear about that a little bit today, just a little bit, but we've got a lot of sessions coming up. And so tonight's topic is about ESSER funding and what is it? What do we need? Why do we need it? What happens? So we've got some great questions that people have asked. We actually have some audience members too that may have some questions. But Jen is the absolute perfect person to me to answer these questions for us. We're getting it from her and her team, but she can break this stuff down. And so she's been able to really help me, and I'm privileged to sit here today. So let's talk about, you want to just dive in?
Sure, let's just dive in.
Okay.
So I've prepared a little bit of a PowerPoint, some slides to help with the basic questions about, if you're wondering what is ESSER, where did it come from, what is it for, what can you spend the money on? Flip to the next slide there. One more. There you go. So these are the basic questions that I get asked a lot. So I thought, well, I'll just put some slides together, answer them, and then we can spend the rest of the time answering other questions from the audience or.
Sounds good.
Okay. So moving on to the next slide. So what is ESSER? It stands for the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, and I can never remember that language, so I have to put it up there. But everybody calls it ESSER. It is a federal grant that's passed through and allocated through the state and Department of Education. And it is specifically for the purpose of responding to COVID-19. And so I get asked a lot of questions about, well, why can't you use it for this or why can't you use it? It's restricted funding, and they are very strict on their compliance. It's monitored both by the Ohio Department of Education and the U.S. Department of Education. and they're under an audit. Ohio's under an audit right now. We have to create budgets according to their guidelines, and then we submit those budgets to the state for review before we're allowed to spend any money. And then we have to spend the money, and they reimburse us. So they didn't write us this big old chunky $300 million check. We have to spend the money first. So can cause a cash flow problem in a school district if you spend too fast.
Right.
So next slide. It's kind of a picture on how the cycle works. So they start with a grant award. They tell us in a letter how much money we were awarded. And then they give us the guidelines on how to spend it. And like I said, we submit the budget plan. And then we have to go through our own procurement procedures for all the quotes and bids and following all those rules. And then we have to order it, get the service or the good, pay for the bill, and then we can ask for reimbursement. And then 30 days later, they send us the money. So that's kind of how the cycle starts. Moving on to the next slide. So I have this huge document that we're going to post on the website after tonight's meeting. It's just too much information to flip onto a slide. So what I did on the slides is I just did the active grants. We've already had 3 or 4 that have already closed out. But there's 3 major ESSER grants, 20 million, 92 million, and 208 million. And you can see that they have different ending dates. So the first one ends this September. And so we're almost spent out, and we're going through all of our final payments now. ESSER 2 is helping to fund a whole host of things. I have a slide list of that. And then ESSER 3, it was the America Rescue Plan, and much bigger. And it's helping us to return back to normal operations, help the district recover for the extra costs that COVID cost us, and learning loss, and try to recover from the learning loss. And so we have until September 24 to spend that money out. We've already spent quite a bit of it already. So the next slide shows you the 4 newest grants. I think it's 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, yes. They're much smaller, but they're very specific. So the top one, you can only spend it on early childhood special education. The second one is about helping graduation from the learning loss. And then you can see those end next September, so we have a whole year to spend that money. And then the next 2 are supporting our homeless population. And then we have until September 24 to pay for that, to finish paying for that. Having said that, I've heard rumors and stories out there where districts aren't spending their money, and there's a lot of money left on the table. We're 45% already spent out. And so we're chugging along pretty well. And we monitor it monthly. Taya Grenbone-Dye is our director, our manager of grants, state and federal grants, and she reports that to the finance committee every month. And so we stay on top of it. So
I have a question for you, Jim. Go back one slide for me, Rob. What happens if it's September 30th, we've got $1 million left? Can we apply to keep that money, or do we just lose it?
So what we'll do is we'll take something out of the ESSER 2 grant and spend it, because that one has an earlier date. And so it frees up ESSER 2 at $1.2 million. But I have fullest confidence we'll have spent it out.
So it's kind of like if you don't figure out a way, you and your team, to finagle, then we would not get to keep that money.
Well,
we can't just divert it.
A lot of our state and federal grants do allow carryover. And they typically limit the amount. So they want you to, the rule is the money they give you, they want to spend on the children of that year, not keep carrying it the future. We haven't been notified of any carryover allowances yet on these grants. I'm sure they'll start. If school districts aren't spending fast enough, they may allow for some of it to be carried over into the future. We're hoping for more grants to come.
Okay. Do you anticipate more relief grants as we're trying to recover our learning loss, but do you anticipate that they'll release more grants out there for us?
I don't know. I haven't heard anything.
Gotcha.
Okay, so move on to maybe the next slide. Okay, so this is a list, the major funds for this school year. You know, the nursing contract, $7.2 million. Pre-COVID, we were spending $1.7 million on school nurses. And so post-COVID, we're up to $7 million. And that's going to present a challenge to us when this money goes away. Excuse me. We're spending $5 million on primary reading specialists to help with learning loss to get those primary first, second, and third grade readers back on target. A ton of money on air ventilation, equipment replacement, HVA filters, cleaning supplies. We budgeted $15 million for summer scholars, which is summer programming to help. And so typically in the past, pre-COVID, we would host summer school for students in certain grades who were needing some extra intervention. Excuse me. Summer Scholars is open to all students so that they can all return back to their learning. We spent money on curriculum. We had a science adoption this year of $8 million. We're also converting a lot of our curriculum to digital learning. We spent a lot of money in technology. We're one-to-one device, K to 12, and in some cases pre-K to 12. We started with what we call super sub teachers, and so because we anticipating having a high absenteeism rate because we're under isolation rules and COVID restriction rules, that we needed, instead of having daily subs that bounce from building to building, carrying all those little viruses around, we would have super subs that were specifically assigned to a school based on their enrollment. And so this year it's about $4 million or a little bit more.
Okay.
The transportation line you see there is in response to when we were in COVID and we were hybrid, we weren't spending as much, so we had cut back on those contracts. Now this is helping us to restore normal service. And then, of course, we're working on 3 major facility projects right now that are all overcrowded buildings and trying to achieve social distancing and better heating and ventilation air systems.
Okay. Gotcha.
So next slide. This is my cliff. Yes. So this is one of my favorite charts because it shows the purple block shows just our general operating funds that we get based on, we're funded in 2 major ways in the general operating fund, on property taxes and the state foundation formula. The yellow represents the pandemic funding. And so you can see in fiscal year 23 and 24, it drops off dramatically. And so everything that's being paid for out of those funds, we have a decision to make, like the school nurses. If we're going to continue having $7 million bills, what are we going to cut out of the general fund to keep those nurses in the buildings? Or do we shave it back? So what we try to do is find things to spend money on at ESSER that aren't necessarily recurring, so that we're not having to reduce forces.
Exactly. And that's a tough thing for people to see. But this slide is super important because we've got all this influx of money and people are like, well, hey, you got $300 million. Use the money. But that's so limited and it's so restricted. And as you can see from the slide previously, there are rules. We've been following the rules and we have to spend it first in order to get reimbursed. So it's a reimbursement. And when you put all that influx of money in, when it goes away, what do we do? What are we left with?
Right. And then so there's a new phenomena that's occurring in the new state foundation formula that was put into place July of 2021, in that the districts are funded by the state based on their wealth. They have a wealth index. And the wealth is from 2 major factors, your property wealth and your federal adjusted gross income, compare relative to the rest of the state. So because we had such an influx in income from stipends from the government and our property wealth, the reevaluation of our property wealth went up, the district got richer, and so the state reduced their share of the state funding. And so that purple line, over a 2-year period, it cost us about $2 million because our property values went up and our resident income went up overall.
So we're considered a wealthy district. And can you also talk about Cincinnati Public in comparison to other districts, what their share is that they pay?
Right.
When we talk about the district wealth.
So compared to the other urbans is probably the best way to do it. We're the wealthiest of the urbans. So Columbus is next, Toledo, Akron, Cleveland gets about 70% of their funding from the state, while we get 40%. So for every dollar that the formula generates, we get 40 cents. Cleveland gets 73 cents. But our populations are very similar, our student populations. And then, there's 613 districts in the state. And so you have your rurals, your suburbans, and then your urbans. And you just measure it against everything else. So nothing could change in Cincinnati, and another district could get poorer because, say, a company moved out of their area, their property wealth goes down. We would get richer just because of that factor when nothing changed for us. Right. And so it's just very difficult to find the right way to fund school districts.
And it's so difficult because people they don't see that. They just think, okay, well, what do you mean you need a levy passed? What do you mean that you can't use ESSER funding to fund your district? Talk about how, and we're gonna have another session on this, so don't worry about getting too deep in it. But one question that people ask is, how come you can't just use ESSER funds for the levy instead of the levy? So that's a huge one. I know you're ready to talk about it.
So this picture helps explain that, because the levy that we're talking about that's coming up on the ballot in November is the third renewal. So it's been on the books for 14 years. It's $51 million a year, and we're asking for a 10-year cycle instead of a 5-year cycle. So as you can see, this money goes away, it doesn't repeat. And so it would be very difficult to continue our operations. There's also restricted purposes for these funds. So you can't go out and just pay for regular classroom teachers or books or supplies or the technology that's down in the data center, the network device, because it's not necessarily related to COVID. But the spend has to be very related to COVID, and they challenge us on a regular basis. Taya and I have been on the phone with them explaining to them, well, I wouldn't be paying for $3 million to do lighthouse ventilation if COVID didn't happen. And so, because they first had rejected that spend. Okay. They told us it wasn't eligible, but once we talked about it, we also at one point used ESSER money to help replace schools that lost revenues because we weren't doing sports. They didn't have gate receipts, but they used that money to pay for stuff for their kids. And so once we explained it to the state, they said, okay, that makes sense. But so they're very particular, and you just can't use the money for just general operations.
Okay. Are they just picking on CPS, do you think?
Yeah. No.
So they're just being particular because this is federal money. It was specifically designated for COVID-related expenses.
Exactly.
And so okay, I gotcha. So can you talk about other things that it can be used for? We talked about ventilation. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the gate. I mean, those are things I wouldn't even think about with regard to athletics. Transportation, we save money. So since we saved money on transportation, how does that help us with regard to ESSER? How does that help? We saved money during the COVID because we didn't transport anybody.
So when COVID hit and we lost money because of reduced enrollment and the state funding changed. So the money helped us return back to normal operations to support our students' needs. And we are now back to pre-COVID enrollment numbers. We're very close, very close. So, at the beginning, the first couple grants, we were using it to prepare for the return or to support online instruction. So we were having to buy more devices and beef up the network and all of our security, software security. We paid for bus monitors to help with social distancing on the buses because you couldn't shove 60 kids on a bus anymore. We bought thermometers and masks and those plastic devices that divide the classroom, the desks to protect students. We paid for extra paraprofessionals in the building to help with safety rules. And so as the rules have changed on supporting and the COVID rules from the health department, we've been able to adapt our budget to reflect those things. And so now we're turning back to recovering from learning loss, supporting online learning. Our Cincinnati Digital Academy enrollment is still really high. And helping with facility expansion to help with social distancing. We still use specialty cleaning supplies when, somebody contracts COVID, then you have to disinfect that building, that classroom, that department. And so those are the kinds of things we're spending the money on.
So what, if anything, can the community do to help us with respect to to offset for ESSER funding? Like, is there anything other than pass our levy, which we absolutely need? We need
Yes,
the
please.
levy to
We don't have
pass.
an issue number yet.
We do. It's issue 3. It came out today.
Oh, it
It's
did?
issue 3.
Okay, I checked earlier and it wasn't there.
So please pass our levy. Please, please, please consider that. But is there anything that we could do, that the community could do to kind of help us when, especially as ESSER goes away? And we saw on the one slide that it's going to go away September 30th. We've got one of them that is expiring.
So this might be a better question for the superintendent, but my idea would be for those that were interested in helping students with learning loss, particularly around reading skills. Because what we saw in the nation is that the younger children, when they were masked, they were having trouble with verbal skills. So we need help, and volunteers would be helpful to that. I don't know how that side of the business would manage it all, but that would be one of my ideas on how to help.
Well, we're going to be talking to the superintendent too. She's going to be on a budget one, just in case. Just in case that's a little teaser.
She couldn't join us tonight. Yeah, had a conflict.
But that's okay, because get on deck, because we are going to have some opportunities for the community to engage. Do we have any questions, Rob, on Facebook, social media? Any audience questions? I'm tough to see. Anybody? Yep. I know you want to ask that. Come on down, Mrs. Futel. Well,
yeah, please come down to the podium.
We can't hear you. And if you do have questions, please, Facebook or social media, put them, or in Blue Jeans, put them in the chat so we can get them answered, because we really, really, really do want to answer your questions regarding
flip to the next slide.
funding. The button.
It looks like a mouth, yeah. Oh, don't.
Is it on? It should have a red light. Working. Well, you know what? I can just.
It looks like a mouth that's shouting.
He's coming.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, there. Get up and run.
I just wanted to see Rob run. That's all right.
Good evening. Thank you, Treasurer Wagner, for your presentation. I know tonight was specifically about ESSER, but you made a comment about, and you kind of touched a little bit on the state formula. And yes, it was a new state formula 2 years ago, and it's limited and all that, and there's folks still fussing about it. But my question is, did we benefit anything from the one that was passed? Did Cincinnati Public Schools benefit from that at all?
Yes. So the new budget formula, House Bill 110, they put more money in supporting the categorical spending, which is students with special needs, ELL gifted, and so they're helping to support those students more. What hurt us was they took the student wellness money and they put it in the formula. So now that formula is subject to that 40%, where before it was on top of. And so that was a little bit of a challenge. And it's not quite fully funded yet. So they're phasing in certain line items of it. And Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that phase-in cost us $36 million in revenue. That's something close to that. And so I have high hopes that it's going to help us more in the future if they fully fund it. But it's a biennium budget, right? So they're getting ready to talk again. And so we're gathering the troops to go and find some political support.
Okay. Yeah. And that's where the community, I think, can help.
Absolutely.
And advocate for that.
So before you leave, so you talked about, it's House Bill 110. That is the school budget formula, just so that people out here can look it up. And when you say that it cost us $36 billion, what does that mean that it cost us?
So the formula is intended to take the numbers and the conditions of our students, and then they went through a bunch of staffing formulas, similar to the way we build our budget. So they did, how many teachers do you need to support your kindergarten students or your first grade students? And then they have weightings for students with disabilities, different disabilities, handicaps, and then English language learners, gifted students, career tech, and economically disadvantaged, which they're now calling DPIA. Then all that is subject to your state share. So whatever it calculates out to, they reduce it by what they say the local government, because we have local control for school boards, they're saying you're going to have to help pay for this. So that's what the local property taxes come in. But if they had fully funded that entire formula, it would have cost, I can't remember the exact values. So there are certain line items that, like the economically disadvantaged, I think was only funded at 16% this year, and then it's going to go up to 24% next year. Yeah, and then so they're ramping it up, but it's a biennial budget, so the proof will be in the pudding when they vote the new budget.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Did I answer your question?
It does.
Okay.
Does it
Yeah,
help?
it makes sense to me too. Just one other quick question on the ESSER. You said there was $15 million for summer scholars, right? And all the students were eligible to come. What was our take rate on summer scholars? Do you have an idea? Did we spend all the $15 million or?
So the $15 million I referred to is for next summer.
Oh, next summer.
We
Okay.
did budget $15 million for this past summer.
Mhm.
I haven't seen the final results of that yet.
Okay.
We didn't spend $15 million.
Okay.
Mm-mm.
But we can ask that question
Yes.
at the board meeting. We can ask the question about, I think one of the board members did ask about the
Presentation.
for summer scholars. So I know it's coming up, but we can find that out too.
Okay.
One of the initiatives that we've started in this district is to attempt to determine a return on investment for some of our projects and vendor contracts to make sure that we're getting the best bang for our buck. Because all those things that are in ESSER that we want to keep have to come back. So we have to make sure that whatever we're spending on is really changing student outcomes.
Yeah.
And so we've worked pretty hard to change the culture. We put some processes in place, and we're getting ready to really get started on it.
Yeah. Good. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
We're trying to get this all stuff in place before you decide to retire and leave us. So we're hustling. We're like, no, she can't go. We're not accepting that.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. So one question. I know we have another audience member that is just like, my property taxes. Can we talk about how people feel that, hey, if it's been deemed unconstitutional that property taxes are funding, the property taxes are funding the schools, why can't we come up with a formula that doesn't involve that? Can we talk about that just a little bit?
Yes, it's not that the property taxes are constitutional. It's the funding formula that was ruled unconstitutional 4 times. House Bill 110, the fair funding formula, is supposed to address that. And had it been fully funded, it came pretty close.
Okay.
The challenge for us is when they do their formulas for staffing, they do district-wide numbers. Well, we have to do it in 65 schools. So already you're losing, you can't divide a teacher in half or between 3 schools. Because the kids don't come in perfect pockets of 25. The other thing is when they cost out the number of teachers and counselors and principals, they're using a statewide salary average and a benefit average. And, in some cases we pay our salaries are above the state average because urban districts have to pay a little bit more to attract the, recruit. And so our local share has to make up that difference. The local property taxes have to make up that difference.
Are we relatively comparable with the other urban 8s? Or are we high?
And you mean in terms of salary?
Mm-hmm.
I think we're pretty comparable. Last time I haven't looked at it recently, but I think we're pretty comparable.
And that just the urban 8s. I keep using these acronyms, but like would be Columbus and Cleveland,
Akron, Toledo,
Dayton. Dayton is as big as we are.
No, they're not as big as we are, but they're
urban.
considered one of the big urbans.
Any other questions? Oh, wait, we got some questions.
We have 2 questions online. So the first one is, can we use the ESSER funds for transportation, as in buying buses? And then after you answer that, I'll have.
Yes, absolutely. We can. The question was, can we use ESSER to buy buses? And yes, we can. Ever since I've been with the district, we've outsourced our transportation services. And so the board has started having conversations about whether that would be a wise thing to do. The challenge with busing is there aren't enough drivers out there nationally. So even if we bought our own buses, we may not be able to recruit enough drivers to drive the buses. So, but it would be a big investment, and so we're thinking through that. But yes, that is an allowable expense.
And we, just to be honest with you all out there, we've had some really nice, meaty discussions amongst board members at the board meetings about transportation and buses and buying a fleet. And in honor of board member Bolton, who is not here, if she were here, she'd be standing up with the mic right now, because that's one
Right.
thing that she really, really wants us to have. The dilemma that we find ourselves in is, if we had 10 extra buses, we wouldn't have drivers any more than the bus companies would have drivers. And so we need people to come out, and if you have a CDL license and you like kids, please come out so that we can get some drivers.
Maybe that's how the community can help. Be a bus driver.
Yes, we need it. And we're hiring for crossing guards too. So bus drivers and crossing guards. Second part of that question?
Funds already spent, what were the largest spending areas and why?
Ooh, that's a good one.
That's a good question. So just to repeat it, out of the money that we've already spent, what were the biggest spending areas and why?
Is it on that slide?
No, that slide is just for 23, for the year that we're in. So we spent some prior money on summer scholars. So we budgeted the first year $30 million. I think we spent about 18. And then this past year, we spent another 15 million. I don't have the final numbers on that yet, probably around 10 or 12. The reading specialist, we've done that this is the third year, I believe. That's $5 million a year. We did some facility upgrades. I think the lighthouse ventilation system was 3.9 million. We are spending money on the dome over at Walnut Hills to create more class cafe and classroom cafeteria.
So all of those improvements, though, for those 3 buildings, that's pretty.
The nurses at $7 million a year is pretty significant. I'm trying to think of any other large spends off the top of my head. But what we can do to follow this up is we'll produce in fact, on October 3rd, I'm doing an ESSER presentation to the board about this is where we are in specifics and then revising the budgets going forward, because as things change, we're having to revise some of our needs. So I will do a presentation and then we'll post that publicly to answer that question, but it's a great question.
Absolutely.
Mr. Ashley.
Yes. I just wanted to clarify, I pulled up on the phase-in for last year being the first year. The general formula phase-in was 16.67%. For the second year is 33.33, which I think is what you were alluding to. And then the disadvantaged pupil was actually 0 that first year and 14% the second year.
Wow.
And so they contemplated a 6-year phase-in to get a full funding, but like she said, the next 2 cycles will make the difference.
So I think over the first 2-year periods, we calculated, if memory serves me correctly, it was about 54 million in total, 36 in 1 year, 20 something in the second year.
At least, yeah.
So we could do a lot with $60 million.
And that's an annual,
Wow.
an annual shortfall.
Right.
Yeah.
So
we could have some buses.
help
We could.
pressure the state to fully fund that program.
So that's something that the community can do.
Mm-hmm.
Please write to and stay on your legislators about fully funding House Bill 110 and getting that funded so that we have more money.
Thank you, Kevin, for clarifying.
Thanks, Kevin.
More questions?
Anybody?
So 16 million was spent on technology. What type of technology was purchased?
So that's a great question. 16 million on technology. What was purchased? So what we did, so we had started with our My Tomorrow initiative several years ago, buying student devices. We started in 7th and 8th grade. The second year we went 9, 12, and then each year after that we added a lower grade. And so with COVID, when everybody had to work from home, everybody needed a device, including teachers and some paraprofessionals. So that money is paying for the leases. So we refresh our technology every 3 to 5 years, and we do it through these operating leases. So back in the day when I was the CIO, the computer line kept getting budget cut. And so we ended up with computers that were 13 and 14 years old, and they were terrible. So my way of not letting it get cut out of the budget was to put it in a multi-year lease. So we've just, ESSER helped fund that. We had to do some security upgrades on the network because so many people were working from home. That puts a risk on the firewall and our security, our software. And then I believe we had to do some investments in the data center downstairs, support all that traffic on our network.
These are great questions.
But also, a lot of the curriculum is being converted to digital technology, so we're having to spend more money on software subscriptions for curriculum.
Mm-hmm. And we also upgraded, was it our science curriculum? We did upgrade.
We did a new adoption, $8 million for a science adoption, which is expensive because of the different equipment that comes with science and all the different courses that come with science and advanced classes.
But we're working. We're putting the money towards our kids.
Yes.
And towards learning, for sure. Any other questions?
Are there considerations for additional funding after ESSER runs out in 24?
We haven't heard anything yet. Actually, I heard that there was an American Jobs Plan. Is that right, Taya? But I don't think that applied to K-12 districts. I think it was meant for other things. So I think my prediction would be there might be something that comes after it, but we haven't heard anything official, and it probably has to do with presidential elections.
I'm sure it does. It's always political. And it shouldn't be. This is about educating our babies.
Right.
It should not be. So let's see. We talked about the purpose of ESSER. We talked about how it's funded and what it can be used for. We also talked about if there's overage, how that happens and how your team does magic with being able to not lose money, but actually maintain what we have. We do have some ESSER funding that is expiring September the 30th, but you anticipate that out of that 1.2 million, we'll be able to save it, and we have things we can spend it on. We could use it on transportation, but we need drivers, and we need people to step up and drive. Some of our retired and older people, come on down. We need you. We need you to be crossing guards. We need you to actually be drivers. So if you have that old CDL license, please dust it off so that we can get some assistance. Let's see. We talked about what the community can do. Please email your legislators because we need some extra help with our school funding formula.
So Rob, can you bring the PowerPoint back up, please? While he's doing that, I have a slide that shows what's coming next on financial town halls. Oops.
And they're actually called Just Ask Jen. So these are called Just Ask Jen. And I'm going to tell you this just while Rob is pulling this up.
There you go.
We have, Jen has been working with me on school finances and funding for years. And so she's really, really finally, I think it's probably taken about 5 years. I've heard the same presentation probably 100 times, and it's finally kicking in. So I'm thinking she is just the smartest person that I know to talk about this stuff. And if she can break it down for me, I know she can break it down. And so one of the things that's on her goals was to do some community engagement. I love engagement. So this was just a natural pairing. And she is really dedicated to giving the community some information that they need, broken down in lay terms so that you all can understand it, I can understand it, and we're just going to have these regular conversations. It was kind of like a fireside chat. We do need a fireplace. So some of our creative
Maybe
students.
Maybe in November we'll do a fireplace.
Yeah, we'll get a fireplace in here, a little faux fireplace going on. And then we also are going to work on some theme music because this is something that she's going to do. She really, really, really is good at this. And so if you do have questions, please feel free to send them in. We have some more questions too. Okay, come on with it.
Relief funds to pay for hiring bonuses for bus drivers.
Hiring what?
Can we use relief funds to pay for hiring bonuses for bus drivers?
Oh. Can we use relief funds to pay for hiring bonuses for bus drivers?
So I know the other school districts have used some of their relief funds to do hiring incentives for employees. I'd have to defer to our compliance team about whether we could do that for vendor contracts.
Because and
I can't see you if
part
you're
of that's
nodding.
because they're not CPS employees, right?
Right.
So they're vendors. So for instance, like First Student is not a CPS. They would be employed by CPS. So I guess the question is, could we pay vendors a bonus to hire? Now, if we had our own fleet, maybe.
So Taya, do you want to come to the mic, come down here to answer, or can
Come
you
on,
shout it
Ty,
out?
come on down. Because that's a good question. Okay, where's I feel Board Member Bolton being channeled in here as to a reason why we need to have our own fleet. But that's a good point. We could pay our own people a bonus.
So while she's coming up, I just want to advertise the next town hall. We had a date change. Originally, we were going to be on the 14th, but I'm going to end up being in Columbus lobbying for our state budget. And so we moved it to the 19th or 29th, and we're going to be talking about our 5-year forecast, how that's built, what's the revenues look like, and why. And we'll go from there. Okay, Ms. Taya.
So yes, I think that we can make a valid case for that with ODE, provided that we could substantiate the drivers that are receiving the bonus are strictly working for CPS. So I would say yes, I do believe that that would be an allowable use of ESSER to provide an incentive for bus drivers.
Great. Good question. Thank you.
This is great news. You might as well
just sit right down there.
Yes, I'm trying to tell you, and you are now my favorite person. You making us get some allowable expenses. So now that's something that we can take back to the board on Monday. We got a board meeting coming up on Monday, the 12th. Tune in.
I'm actually meeting with the superintendent tomorrow to start working on the revision of the budget. So I'll let her know.
Yes, that was a great question. Whoever asked that question, thank you. Any other ones in the chat?
So can ESSER funds be used for early learning programs with local organizations for kids 0 through 4? So like United Way, stuff like that.
Can you repeat? I didn't catch the whole thing. Early learning?
Can ESSER funds be used for early learning programs or early development programs with local orgs, so organizations that we partner with?
So that's a complicated question. So we do partner with the Cincinnati Preschool Promise, that we use some general fund levies to support the expansion of preschool. And we do use our funds to support our preschoolers. So we have about 1,800 preschoolers enrolled as of today, 3 and 4-year-olds. And we do support, I think their budget this year was $11 million. And so we did use ESSER to help with summer programming for the preschoolers because they're typically not part of summer learning. And so we did that this last couple of years, I think. And so, yes, it can be done. We just have to make sure that we're following all the state guidelines for proper public purpose.
So that's a great question. I call the little people, the preschoolers, the land of the littles. I don't know if you guys have been over there and hanging with the littles, but they are awesome. So if we could do anything to support our land of the littles, absolutely. Absolutely. Any other questions?
Okay, so next slide. So here's a schedule coming of the future town halls, ideas that we thought of, topics that we thought people would be interested in. In November, the forecast. January, we start talking about the new budget cycle. In February, we'll plan to do all the state and federal grants and how we use all that money. And then do an update on the budget in March before the board starts voting on it. And I really would like to do a town hall on the Community Reinvestment Act and the abatements because there's so much confusion out there about how they impact the district. And then I also put down there, if there's a topic that somebody in the audience is interested in and we haven't talked about or I haven't come up with an idea, send me an email and put in the subject line, $ town hall, and I'll make sure that we address it. So I'm always looking for great ideas.
I know one idea that Jen talked about, and I hope that she does, is she was going to take a tax bill and analyze, help a regular person look at their tax bill and how parts of your bill fund CPS?
So I do this for when I teach school board school and the board responsibility for finances. There's 13 taxing entities on the Cincinnati resident tax bill, property tax bill. CPS is the largest share, but we're not the only one. And so on the Hamilton County website, I mean, you get a paper bill in your mail, but if you go on the website and pull up your address and look at tax distributions, you can see they have a nice little pie chart, and so it's really interesting. To me, it's interesting, but yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
I know to the regular person, when I see the tax bill, I'm not trying to look for CPS. I'm definitely not. I'm not trying to. I don't want to pay the tax bill, but you got to pay it. But it would be really nice to know about how your tax bill impacts us as a district. And then another question that we had at our one of the gentlemen asked the question in the public is, how does the lottery fund schools? Because they advertise it that the lottery helps with education. You all have heard those commercials before. The lottery
it's a bait and
helps
switch.
Well, yeah. So it would be really cool if your team did a Just Ask Jen on what is the actual amount that the lottery, because I know some people that play the lottery just to help schools, right? That was a joke. You guys are supposed to laugh about that.
So we'll add the lottery conversation into the financial forecast one because it's part of that formula. So, okay, Kevin, is that cool? Yeah. It's like, sure, whatever you want. And maybe I'll slip the tax bill thing on that one too. If we have time. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Of course, if you guys have any other questions, I just think that we have got such a wealth of information with you and your team that we really want to ensure. I want to ensure that we have as many opportunities as possible to get the information that you all have out to the community, because I think that people really do want to know.
So one other thing that we're doing, and Mark will probably kill me for talking about this because we're not that way yet, but we were starting to do whiteboard animations on certain topics. So the first one is, well, how is a school district funded? So have you ever wondered why school districts have to go to the ballot for the public for taxpayer dollars? So I wrote up a script, and we're going to do a whiteboard animation. And then as topics come up, because we tried to do these video snippets, we practiced the first one. It was a simple question, what is a mill? And it turned into a 30-minute conversation. Well, you can't do a video that's 30 minutes long. So this is my way of trying to attempt that. So we'll post them on the website. We'll advertise it when we get it done. But it's coming. So
it is coming. And, again, she cannot answer this question, but she has the information on what is a mill. We hear that in the community. Oh, it's based on millage. It's a mill. But I don't know what that means. You had to break it down to me. And maybe because she was talking to me like I was too, because I really didn't understand. But people in the community need to understand that. So we are really dedicated. Jen and her team and the staff are super, super dedicated to really giving you all information so that you can not only learn from it, but share it with other people. So that stuff is coming. I'm excited. I do think we should have had a Just Ask Jen about instead of the doodle thing, Mark, but we can just do another one.
Yeah.
We just need the faux fireplace. That's all we need is the faux fireplace to get it started. Do we have any more questions? Is that it?
No. How are we on time?
Oh, wow. Okay. What else are we going to talk about? We can talk about some of the other stuff because I think people really do want to understand funding. I have a question for you. What's the budget what was our budget this year? I know that answer, but what was our budget this year for the fiscal year 2022-2023?
Like 600. Well, you asking me for the general fund budget or all the budget?
All of the budget.
So we manage almost $1 billion, and between $670 million of the general fund, and another 50 or 60 million in title funds, and then on top of that with the ESSER. We also manage $20 million of pass-through funding with auxiliary. I'm looking at title, yeah. So the non-publics that are our student residents receive intervention services and support services through us. And the non-public spend the money, but we are the fiscal agent, so we have to work on that too.
And that's 20 million?
It's about 20 million, wow. I think, from all the different grants.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's almost $1 billion. You said almost $1 billion?
Almost $1 billion.
Wow. Mm-hmm. So, wow, that's a lot. I had a question today from a young adult, And we were talking about transportation, and he said, "Hey, I heard about this transportation thing," and that's not a simple answer to the question, like what's wrong with transportation. But he said, I said, the budget for CPS is really a lot of money, and he's like, "Well, what do you all have to pay for?" So I'm like, quite a bit. He's like, "Well, what is transportation? Like $3 million?" I was like, ha ha ha.
It's like 50 million. But, and the state reimburses us for some of that, but I think we get about 17 million a year in reimbursement when we spend 50.
Wow. So we've got salary. What goes into the budget? We've got salary
For transportation or just in general?
In general.
Right. So we have 6,000 employees, 3,000 classroom teachers, counselors, principals, the central administration. We have the treasurer's office, superintendent's office, busing services. We have special education services. We pay for coaches for athletics, extracurricular, the arts club, robotics clubs, curriculum. We have a human resource department that has to hire and benefit all our employees.
And we pay like regular people utilities and things like that, don't we?
Yeah, we spend about $10 million on electricity a year.
Well, 66 buildings is a lot.
Yes.
Wow. And if you've ever driven past our buildings, they're lit up at night. So we have a huge electric bill and water bill.
And because our schools are community learning centers, they're used by the community in off hours. So to support
wow, that's a lot.
Our students, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else that you can think of? I'm thinking, what are some other questions that I've gotten in the community? I'm trying not to give us a topic that's going to take us past 10 minutes because there's lots of questions that I have. But
right. Like, what is a mill?
Like I was going to say, what is a mill is a long. Oh, wait, we got one.
All right. So a lot of people, when they look at budgets, they just see a big number and think you can spend it wherever you want. But most people don't understand like how they're categorized or how they're placed into buckets. But what are like the major buckets or categoricals that the Ohio Department of Education requires our funding to be spent on?
So it flows with the funding formula. So there's state law where you have to have a principal, you have to have a teacher, you have to have a treasurer, superintendent, and curriculum. And then there are federal laws that say that students with certain disabilities have to have accommodations. And so we have to provide those, whether it's Braille reading or physical accommodations, or an extra adult in the classroom to help with learning. So is that what you're meaning? Yeah, okay. Instructional supplies and all these, as inflation happens, all this stuff costs more every year on, whiteboards and new technology, new software to teach education. We have software that routes the buses. We have software that tracks all of our spending. We have software that enrolls the students, does their master schedules, does their grades, communicates with the parents, and so they can look up their electronic grade book.
What would you say the cost? And I know I don't want an exact number because I know it's tough. But what is the cost to educate each student? Like, what's the average cost? Is it like 12?
About $13,000 a year, but it can go as high as $36,000 a year, depending on the student's needs.
So, trying to keep this simple question because I know it will get bigger. But if it's, let's say, roughly $13,000 per student, how does that? We only get a certain percentage of that. I'm trying to keep it a small question. We only get a certain percentage of that.
So we typically get about $4,000 per child from the state.
And then, and this is just a student that doesn't have any extras, for instance, like a student with disabilities or any other extras.
That's just the average. So our local property taxes, which represents more than 50% of our funding now, makes up the difference. So the strategic initiatives, the extra services that we provide our students. We have 91 square mile school district, 4 minutes. Thank you. And so that costs more money when you have to traverse 91 square miles. compared to a smaller, like suburban district. But I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
No. You said the levy, the
Local
taxes
share. And then our state and federal grants are supposed to supplement what we're already doing. So the general fund is supposed to, that's made up by the state foundation formula and property taxes, is supposed to pay for the core education. What does every child get? A teacher, a textbook, or software device. But then you start laying on state and federal grants to supplement what they're already doing with the district to assist those students achieve student outcomes.
I know that question can get bigger because I've seen the student and then he was full up with so much, and so I'm just trying to help people understand.
I'm trying to figure out an infographic that would explain all that, but it's so complicated. It's hard to break it down that simply.
Well, that helps. That it costs $13,000. We don't get the full share of what that costs, so we have to offset that with levies and the state funds, etc. So that's one reason why we need our levy passed, which is a renewal. It's issue 3. We need that passed November the 8th. It's very important, and it's a renewal. Sorry, I'm saying that 5 times, but we need it because we don't get the full cost for educating a student.
Right, and so unfortunately, the shift in state funding is putting a bigger burden on our local property taxes, our local property taxpayers to help fund K-12 education.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm. So, okay. I think we should just kind of wind it up.
I think we should, and I hate that, but don't forget our next session is November the 29th. I'm glad you moved it because I'll be in Columbus with you, and I was going to have to miss it. But November the 29th, is that a Thursday? It's a Tuesday. Tuesday, November the 29th at 6 p.m. And what was the topic again?
The forecast, the financial forecast. And so,
the financial forecast. But before that, on November the 8th, I need everyone to vote for our levy so that we will have good news to report to you on the 29th at our next financial town hall. And will these animated snippets be out by then? Maybe.
We're hoping so. We're hoping so.
Okay, so we may have some other good things to promote as well.
Yes. Very exciting.
Well, this has been my pleasure. I am Kareem Moffitt, sitting here with our treasurer, Jen Wagner. Thank you so much for being here. If you do have questions for her, I think her contact information is going to be up. Send her some questions with the hashtag or
just the $ town hall if you want a topic that for us to address in a town hall setting.
And your feedback is important as well. So it has been our pleasure. Good night.
Good night. Thank you, everyone.